Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. What's the most horrific thing that happened in your hometown? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. A little boy was taken from his mother in a shopping center by two little boys and murdered in the most brutal way. The boys who took him were only 10 and 11, and the little boy was 2. That was 20 years ago. The two murderers are out now. They have new identities. That was by far the worst thing that happened in my neighborhood. Husband and wife owned a taco shop. Husband went crazy one night and saw his wife transformed as the devil. Supposedly, husband had just had a large blood clot removed from the brain recently. Killed her and dismembered her. Put her head in a box on a neighbor's porch. Had to get rid of the rest of the body. Owned a taco shop. I lived in a pretty violent city in Brazil. They did not have any mercy when they caught thieves. One day a year or so ago, they hanged a thief on the light post on my street. No one talked about it, which made it even scarier that it wasn't a big deal. I went to school in the northern part of Dublin for a couple of years. One day, two sisters who also went there didn't show up for school. Some nasty rumors started floating around, but nobody really knew why they were gone. It turns out their mom had had her head bashed in with a brick. 2 days later, they found out who the perpetrator was. It was their dad. The girls eventually returned to school, but they were never the same. 9/11. No, I'm serious. I live in the Rockland, New York metropolitan area, Rockland County, and a lot of people who lived in my town commuted to the city and worked in the World Trade Center. I personally knew several people who lost their lives in the towers and surrounding area, and the amount of people around town who also lost friends and loved ones that day, just horrific. Guy down the street got into an argument with his folks, sat down on the porch swing, dumped a gas can on himself, and lit up. Parents and neighbors had to listen to his screams while they tried to put him out. Died before they could. We had a middle school teacher murder his wife's lover, and the 2 children of the lover. When I was in his class years before, he would do things like call 8th grade girls whores in front of the class. He also said he had a gun and would kill anyone that ever messed with his family. I guess the warning signs were there. In our town by the Sainsbury, a food retail chain in the UK, an old woman accidentally pressed the wrong foot pedal in her car and accelerated over the road, over grass, and into the bench outside the shop where a young man was sitting, and it killed him. In the mid-1990s, a girl named Heather Teague was kidnapped from a rural Newburgh beach in Henderson County, Kentucky. The entire tri-state area was on full alert. She had been tanning naked on the beach alone and allegedly was meeting someone there. A man with a telescope saw her and kidnapped by a bald man with a beard while he was watching her from across the river in Newburgh, Indiana. Her remains have never been found. The primary suspect committed suicide when the sheriff was coming to talk to him, and his wife still won't speak of it. Rumors have circulated. Around the time of her death, a concrete porch was poured at a trailer in Bluff City, perhaps holding her remains. But the owner of this trailer recently died of a heroin overdose. A long-standing rumor was that she'd been thrown down a well in Robards, but a recent search turned up nothing. It's also been rumored that she was simply fed to hogs at a farm in Smith Mills. Motivations for the kidnapping have never been ascertained. Some say it was to pay drug debt. Some alleged that the cornfield mafia or cornbread mafia were involved. Heather was 23 at the time of her kidnapping. In recent years, there have been kidnappings of women of similar build and physical appearance to Heather. A few of these women have been found alive, but not all have been so lucky. It's quite possible there's a serial killer who strikes infrequently in the area. There's 2 that stand out, both from my small hometown, about 5,000 people. About 10 years ago, a group of 4 students went out at lunch. The driver was speeding and got into a wreck. He survived. The other 3 girls in the car didn't. Students haven't been allowed to leave on lunch since, as far as I'm aware, graduated about 5 years ago. The second is creepier, but no people died. About 6 or 7 years ago, a satanic cult was busted. It was a group of about a dozen 7th to 10th graders trying to be Satanists. They had been murdering cats in a spot in the woods not far from the center of town. They'd hang them up and drain the blood into buckets to use in their rituals. A woman on her way home from a Julfrokost, a kind of Christmas party we do in my country, where we get exceedingly drunk, was killed and dumped in the harbor. Having people go missing was very unusual, so police dispatched choppers and a huge crew. I remember a chopper hanging over my house as it searched the fjords. It was extremely odd for something like that to happen in a town where the front page of the newspaper usually talks about the eating habits of the elderly or a new patch of apple trees being planted in the park. In our street, there was a ceramic shop owned by a Sicilian family with an industrial oven and all that type of equipment. The dad of the family went to Sicily for a few days, and when he came back, he found his only 20-year-old son burning inside the industrial oven with several nails in his skull. This was 5 years ago, and the case was never solved, and the dad turned his ceramic shop into a little supermarket. Well, that's absolutely horrible, and they still work there in a different capacity. It's got to be tough. You can list all kinds of things like brutal murders, serial killers, etc. One of the things that upsets me the most here was a minor story quickly forgotten. A young woman just stopped showing up for work one day, and no one bothered to check up on her for a couple of weeks. When they finally tried to track her down, they found out she died of a seizure in her apartment. She had a 2-year-old little boy who slowly died of hunger and thirst beside his mother's body because no one had bothered to investigate her disappearance until it was too late. My grandma got taken out by a car whilst walking on the pavement or sidewalk to the hairdresser. I remember the whole main road was closed off and we had to walk a mile home as there were police and sirens everywhere. As young kids, we were all excited to hear what was going on. The excitement soon dissipated once I arrived home to the news. When I was in primary school, the girl who lived 3 or 4 houses away from me was taken out of her bedroom window at night and AR'd in a nearby park. I was about 9, so she would have been maybe 6 or 7. The scary part is, roughly at the same time that the police thought she was taken, 2 a.m., our dog started barking like crazy and woke my parents and neighbors up. It was weird to think about what might have been. Not in my neighborhood, but across town. It disgusts me even typing about it. 3 males and 1 female carjacked a young couple. They took them to their house where they separated them. They took the guy to some railroad tracks, sodomized him with a broom handle, shot him and set him on fire. Then they went inside and AR'd his girlfriend for hours, every way imaginable. She was still alive when they dumped bleach down her throat to try to kill the DNA. They put her in a trash bag and then in a garbage can. She was still alive. It took her hours to suffocate to death. Throughout the trial, they kept showing her poor father in the courtroom. You could watch him age before your eyes, having to hear everything his daughter endured. Finally, all 4 were convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Ordeal over, right? Wrong. It came out that the judge had been addicted to pain pills and was using them during the trial. A mistrial was declared, and the victims' families had to do the entire thing all over again. I try not to fuel the racism fire, but the victims were white, and the suspects were black. It was heavily implied throughout the trial that the victims were chosen only because of the color of their skin. I never saw this on the national news. If the races were reversed, every national news station would be talking about the trial every day until it was over. I'm all for equality, but it's a two-way street. Should be. In my hometown, a 19-year-old guy with a knife entered kindergarten and murdered 3 kids and their teacher, wounding a nurse. After that, he left and was spotted and captured by a responding police car while calmly walking down the street drenched in his victim's blood. It happened in 1998, I think. I wouldn't say I knew him, but I've seen him on a couple of occasions before it happened. Due to this being a really small town, you couldn't help noticing people. He was a weird, quiet dude. Studied law for half a year, but got booted for poor academic performance, if I remember correctly. He got life in prison. When I was in elementary school, I met one of the father's old friends. He owned this small wildlife refuge where he took care of local wildlife that was injured, and he nursed them back to health for release into the wild. Most notably, he had a small pride of mountain lions that refused to leave him. He had a small amount of government funding, but worked at my elementary school's janitor to fund his family, instead of using the government's money. Government money went straight to the wildlife. One night, his wife had enough of having to live off 2 minimum wage jobs instead of a government fund and shot him. She threw him into the lion's cage and called the police, claiming the lions had attacked him. She thought they would tear him apart before the police could arrive, but they protected him as he lay dying, even from the police who showed up to save him. He died about 30 minutes before they could tranquilize the lions. He has a full foundation now, dedicated to his memory and run by his mother. I think it's a tie between the Denny's blowing up close to the school because of a gas leak or the very serious bomb threat that happened at my high school my junior year. We didn't know there was a possible bomb in the school until I got a text from a friend who was a firefighter on scene, saying that there was possibly a bomb in the school. Keep in mind, we were still inside the school for a while. They kept us inside because they were concerned about an active shooter situation. Day ruined. While not in my neighborhood, it was very close. My father runs a fairly successful company attracting many customers. There was one lady in particular who I saw quite often and would stop by and say hi from time to time. She genuinely seemed like a very kind person. Anyway, I live in Australia, home of infamous serial killer Ivan Milat. Yes, he went on a hunger strike for a PS3, who began murdering local backpackers. This made news headlines, where one day I watched one of the reports on TV and see her listed as murdered. It turns out she was brutally murdered by Ivan. Sadly, someone murdered and set fire to the house of a very sweet elderly lady in the very small town I grew up in a few years ago. According to his confession to what was stated with his own sick pride, he had let her burn to death while she screamed, tied up in her own bed. He had just gotten out of jail for doing the same to other older ladies, which he had served 25 years or so for. She was really a wonderful woman. She sang in the church choir with my mother and me, and when my mom passed, she was the first to send her condolences and bring us food. Her husband had died many years ago, so she lived by herself out in the country. This was one of the first murders in the whole county for many, many years. It really changed everyone. Doors and cars that were once unlocked all day now had stronger locks and alarms. Rest in peace, Claridel. You are a wonderful woman, and I hope wherever you are that you don't remember a thing from your last hours.